to introduce our speaker, Dr. Darria Gillespie, and tell you just one minute's worth of information about her, and then welcome her and thank Dr. Darria for coming to speak with us. Dr. Darria is a board-certified emergency room doctor who trained in emergency medicine at the Yale School of Medicine. She also earned her MBA at Harvard and was on faculty was a member of faculty at the Harvard Medical School. She is a regular contributor on air on networks such as CNN, HLN, the Dr. Oz Show, and Doctors, among other networks. Dr. Darria has 2 children, a 1.5-year-old son and a 4.5-year-old daughter, so she's not busy. And I'd like to introduce and welcome Dr. Darria. Thank you.
How does it sound here?
Good? All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for that lovely, warm introduction, Deborah. It's great to be here. I grew up in Chattanooga, went to GPS, so I know there's one bruiser here. And for me, my Westminster memories were running track meets here and going home with little green rubber in your everything, in your gym bag and everything else from the track. So it's really exciting to be here. So again, thank you. This is for you, this time here. So yes, we'll have time for Q&A at the end, but if anything I say doesn't make sense or you want more clarification or more examples or anything, because I'll be going quickly through it, just raise your hand, just holler. You know, it's a small group, so please feel comfortable doing that. I want to start off with a story. So imagine, if you will, I was in the emergency department one day taking care of a patient, a 72-year-old male who was in there with septic shock. So I was in full sterile gowns trying to put in a large IV access to give him the medications that he needed. At that moment, the EMT radio went off. Beep. Coming in with a 29-year-old female, herself an EMT, who they thought may be having a stroke because she had developed sudden right-sided paralysis. And the nurse wanted to let me know that this patient was coming in. During all of this time, of course, I could still hear the lady out in the hallway in the hospital bed waiting for her family to pick her up, who had asked every passerby if they wanted to buy a vowel. I had that in the background. This is the ER, of course. And then while I was doing that, the nurse came up to me with an EKG, because every EKG in the hospital has to be run by a physician to look at it, and she wanted me to see it. Now I was in sterile gear, so I couldn't touch it, so I leaned over carefully and she held it towards me. And it was very clear to see that this person, who was the newest patient in the room right next door, was having a massive heart attack. So what do you do? In situations like that in the ER, much like life for the rest of us, there is often too much to do and too little time to do it. And it's our natural inclination to get overwhelmed, to want to sometimes hide under that desk. But you don't. You can't, you cannot afford to. Of course, that's not because we're superhuman or there's any special magic in the emergency department. So what we're going to talk about today is because we have systems in place. We have protocols, we have training, we have teamwork to help you know what to do in those moments. Because when those doors open in the emergency department, every single time, you have to be able to say, I've got this. And so we're going to talk about how to help you do that in life, too. So I had that. But then I became a patient. In my intern years, suddenly I developed swelling in my joints. My feet swelled up, my hands swelled up. I went from being somebody who ran every single day to I was unable to walk. As Deborah mentioned, I was at Yale, so I went to Boston for a second opinion. And in that time, that intervening time of 2.5 hours of driving, by the time I got there, my pain was so bad, I ended up leaving my car unlocked because I realized 50 feet away that I hadn't locked it. I didn't care. I hurt that badly. I was put on immunosuppressive medications, had to give myself a shot twice a week, who, if you want to see a sad patient, watch a doctor trying to give herself a shot. God bless the nurse who was teaching me how to do it around this. And I gave my first one. I think I tasted it. I think I got an artery. She's like, you're fine. So I didn't like that. I didn't like worrying every single time I saw a patient, now that I was immunosuppressed, that I was at risk of getting the next thing. What was I going to do? I decided to start making some changes because I wondered, how can I be so in control in the emergency department and then so not in my life. I started to make these changes, and I was told, that'll never work, which to an emergency doctor or a girl from Tennessee sounds like an invitation. And it worked. Really quickly, and I'll get to how it did. Really quickly, as Deborah mentioned, I, during that time, started realizing that I wanted to get to my patients, not at the moment that I saw them in the ER, but 2, 5, 10 years ahead of time. I wanted to put myself out of business. So that's how I started working in the media, doing television, as she mentioned, Dr. Oz and CNN, and some more there, and then coming up with my own book, which is like a third child in many ways. And why? Because I had heard that that'll never work when I had arthritis. And then I was pregnant with my first child, talking about going to go work out to a friend and another mom, and she said, oh, once you have that child, you forget about going to the gym ever. And I remember thinking, what am I in for? Do I need to reevaluate? And I started doing research, and I realized that in many ways she was right. Because when you become a parent, a mom, but also this exists for a parent, your risk of any bad health condition goes up. For every additional child a woman has, her risk of obesity rises by 7%, and she's statistically more likely to sleep less, to stress more, to eat more poorly, and not have time to exercise. I mean, anybody agree with that? Amen. And I said, what's happening here? What was worse is that it seemed like everybody accepted this. Like this was the way it was, and the complications that we see around pregnancy, that was the way it was. So that same voice of that will never work is what I was hearing. And I thought, you know what? We find cures for diseases. We print ears with 3D printers. We have solved how to pee in space, which I still don't know how they do that, but they do. We could solve this. And so that's how I started to do that. I said, what are those systems that we have in place in the ER that enable us to function, and how can we put those in place in our own lives? So that's what evolved into the book of Mom Hacks, which is coming out next February 19th of 2019, which when I was told that felt very much like another due date. But available for pre-order. We'll have a little bit of pre-order down here, or you can get it on Amazon at any point. Because I realized those skills that I learned in the ER were transferable. They were transferable to life. That day I finished my procedure on that patient. I gave the 29-year-old female, it turns out she had a clotting disorder, so we gave her a clot-busting drug, activated the stroke protocol, and she started to get better in front of our eyes, which is unusual, but it was amazing. And the cath lab patient, we activated the cardiac catheterization protocol. The cath team was down there before he'd even taken off his socks to whisk him away. Because that's how these things work through these systems. Now, that's how we survive in the ER. So when you get those moments when you are overwhelmed, what I used to do is tell my junior residents, you've got this. You know what to do. Now go gown up. And that's what we're going to talk about how to do today and what I'm going to share with you. So a couple of things talking about why it is so hard at times, and then we'll get into some of the system and the hacks. Now, in the book, there's 110 hacks, and trying to choose a few to present to you is kind of like choosing your children. It was hard to do, but I'll try to bounce through a bunch of them. My goal today and my intention is that each of you just take one. This is not for you to go home and change your life. I don't have time to change my life right now. But you do have time to make small incremental changes. So that's my intention for each of you, is to look through all the different things we talk about today and come up with one that you want to go home with. So why? Why do we see it and why do we need a system? Because decision and cognitive overload, there's too much to think about in the emergency room and in life. There's millions of data points that go through our subconscious brain, but our conscious brain can't handle that. Some studies show that we can only handle about 7 discrete data points at any given point in time. Other than that, we start to filter out. Today, and some days I feel like I'm on a 1 in, 1 out basis, not a 7 at all. But we start to filter it out. And the fact is we are entirely blind to that filtering of what goes from our subconscious to our conscious. How blind? Let's see. Show you a quick example, and you'll see the instructions at the beginning.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Okay, how many? Just raise your hands. How many?
17.
So, perfect. So 17 is the right answer. How many people saw the gorilla? Yeah. And now this was totally, because some of you started laughing when the gorilla came up, and I was like, that's going to throw them. So let's go back. Remember, we're talking about being blind to the filtering. And for those of you who saw the gorilla, how many of you saw the color of the curtain change? Okay, what about how many saw the girl in the middle of it just leave and walk out and not come back? Okay, so let's watch again. We're just not the full segment, but just part of it. Now we see the gorilla. Now the curtain changes, and the girl walked out right when the gorilla came in. Turns out like I mentioned, we're entirely blind to that filtering. And it's how two people can go to New York City, and one person sees the bright lights and the excitement and the potential, and the other sees the crowds, the smell, and the noise. What is it? It's not anything different. It's the filtering, and that comes down to cognitive overload, decision overload, because what we see is what is in front of us, not as what's most important. So again, let me repeat that. What we see is not what's most important, but what is in front of us, which is often just some instructions to watch a white shirt, or that pinging email, or that text that comes in, or, ooh, cookies in the break room. Whatever it is, that's what attracts our attention. So we're going to talk about how to do that. Because, like I mentioned, it happens in the ER, but it happens every single day for each of us. You end up filtering out the important things, and you miss what you should be looking at. Because what happens? Snooze again. Ooh, where's my gym bag? I hate working out. Ooh, I'm hungry. Donuts. Again, these are all the white shirts, and you miss the gorilla, you miss what's important. And what does it also do? It increases our stress level. When we have these kind of decisions constantly going up in the background, switching back and forth to them, it also increases our cortisol levels, which we know for many of us, our cortisol levels are at this chronically elevated state. What does that do? It decreases our mental function, it decreases our memory. It also puts us into fat storage mode. Because your body says, ooh, cortisol is high. Something's gonna happen. Let me store this away. Let's not use this for energy. Let's store this away. And where does it store it? It stores it particularly in the abdominal visceral fat area, which has 4 times more glucocorticoid receptors than the rest of your body. So anybody struggling with weight right here, it's often a result of that chronic stress and kind of sugar dependence, which we're gonna be talking about. Last thing is willpower runs out. So we talked about decision overload, and that is because your decision overload and your willpower are run by your prefrontal cortex. It is a younger portion of your brain. It's more primitive. It's more a recent adaptation versus the more primitive kind of fast brain that they talk about. And it gets tired, it gets overloaded, it runs out. There's some great research. A lot of the stuff in the book is from behavioral psychologists and behavioral economists, and they do some brilliant research. We'll talk about a lot of it. It usually involves chocolate. There's one by Dr. Roy Baumeister involving chocolate versus radishes, which shows that behavioral psychologists are just cruel. But they show that willpower runs out. And whether you're using that willpower to not eat the cookie, wake up earlier, or just not scream at your teenager, it all comes from the exact same pool. So how do you not leverage willpower? Because studies show that the people who are most successful at making health changes are not because they're superhuman, just like we're not superhuman in the ER. It's because they have systems in place, so they're not even using that decision overload and having to rely on willpower. So also, I think of willpower and that executive function as your David Spade. Little quiet voice, you can get drowned out. And then there's your fast brain, as Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman refers to it. Is your fast brain, is your primitive, is your Chris Farley brain. It says must eat. The David Spade is your Jiminy Cricket. And again, your Chris Farley will overload your Jiminy Cricket or your David Spade.
I thought you were trying to lose weight.
Lay off me, I'm starving.
Bottom line, don't rely on willpower. Don't try to power your way through decision overload, and don't bring David Spade your Chris Farley fight. Here's how. So in the ER, I'm not teaching you an ABCs of the ER. Don't worry, we're not going to get into some ACLS. That's for another lecture, another time. But this is how we do it. We have airway, breathing, circulation. So that every time you go see a patient, whether it's a code or a trauma, you're not reinventing the wheel. You have a system. So that's what we have. We're going to talk about today. I call it DARE: design, automate, reframe, and engage. These are the hacks. The hacks are not to add to your to-do list. They're to make your to-do list easier to do, because that's what we all need. So when I started and when I work in the ER, I can look at those doors and say, I know, I've got this. And now you are each going to have this as well. Now, Deborah, do they have the little printout? Oh, I'm sorry, you don't get it until the end. You get a little printout at the end with much of this, the DAREs on there. DARE, D, is design your environment. So I know Westminster loves design thinking, right? I've seen your Skunk Works lab and all of that. Because what is design thinking? It's focusing on the user. Not the way we wish it were, but on the user. And that is you. And what are you when it comes to design thinking? We have caveman brains in a modern world. So first, we got to just accept that. We're not trying to change our caveman brains. We're just trying to change the environment. So pretty easy for our caveman relatives to get their daily exercise and eat their vegetables. In fact, for our caveman relatives, it was pretty easy because for them, sugar, not pretty, I should caveat, but sugar, salt, and calories were scarce. So we evolved to crave them. We needed them from a survival standpoint. Exercise was inevitable. So we didn't need to want to go run on the treadmill, and that was great. Except in the last 50 years, suddenly the environment has changed. Now suddenly sugar, salt, and fat are everywhere, and exercise is tough to get. Well, our body hasn't figured out what it evolved for millennia that suddenly needs to change for 50 years. So you can suddenly try to change your body, or you can use some design thinking to make the environment something that makes it easier for you. It makes it easier to make healthy decisions. That's what design thinking is for this, for DARE. It is how to put obstacles between you and the unhealthy and remove those obstacles between you and the healthy decision so that you're not making a decision. It's the easy thing to do. Here's one little example. Again, remember, obstacles between you and the unhealthy. You know what, guys? Whatever works. I am not above that. So let's go through a bunch of hacks for design. Number one, design your environment, nutrition. I'm going to go through 3 or 4 for nutrition. It's amazing how much we are influenced by our environment. A study out of the University of Utrecht, again, they used M&Ms, right? Like this is going to be a theme throughout this talk. I apologize if anybody is going to leave wanting M&Ms. But they looked at people and how much they consumed M&Ms. They put people in a chair with M&Ms here, 3 feet away, and 6 feet away. And they found that when the M&Ms were 6 feet away, people ate 30% of what they would have eaten. They ate 2/3 less. And their cravings didn't go up at all. We're really that lazy. And laziness can even trump chocolate. So that's what design thinking is put the single obstacles. How can you do this in your home? So if you always sit in one place, maybe you don't put the chocolate in or whatever the snack is right next to you. If you have your food in a pantry, put it one shelf up so that you have to get a stool. That alone, just one obstacle, that action of having to get a stool, it doesn't require willpower. The effort of getting a stool is greater than the value of the chocolate. Ask anybody who's put their Halloween candy up on a shelf and then realized 8 months later that they'd forgotten to eat it. One obstacle between you and the food. Number 2 is put it out of sight. So Google had a problem because Google gives free food to their employees. Again, what food? M&Ms was their problem. They were eating too many of them and they were worried about their health. So they had some behavioral psychologists come in and they did one change with the M&Ms. They took them from the clear containers that they were in and they put them in opaque containers. That's it. They didn't do anything else. They didn't tell people not to eat it or anything. And in 2 months, their 2,000 employees ate 3 million fewer calories of M&Ms. Same studies have been found when people have a candy dish on their desk. If it's opaque, they eat about half as much as if it's clear, if it's in a clear container. Again, every time you see it, if it's there and it's visible, and every time you see it, that choice not to eat is a conscious choice, and you're adding to those, that's going to be one of those 7 decisions you can make. don't exhaust yourself that way. Another one is when you store snacks. How many of you have a cake on the counter, maybe with a fork, and you have the knife with it? Anybody do that? Okay. My mom, thank you, somebody honest, and the gentleman in the back. My mom does this at our house with this Philadelphia cream cheese pound cake, and you just get a little sliver, come back, get a little sliver, come back. By the time you know, you're like, hey, where'd half the cake go? So Dr. Tracy Mann, who wrote the book Secrets from the Eating Lab, which is for somebody like myself who loves that kind of thing, I thought it was fascinating, said, simple, don't store the knife with the cake. Cut yourself your cake. Again, this is about putting an obstacle in the way. Then put the knife away, put it in the dishwasher, it's away. Now suddenly you're gonna have to pull out a knife and a plate. You're gonna find that again, you're not gonna be using it as much. Design for sleep. Okay, switching from nutrition to sleep. Now, many of us, anyone with children, we know that this became a challenge. How does design work for sleep? Two ways. One, our environment, our circadian rhythm is exquisitely linked to our environment. It was the way we survived so that you would sleep at night or sleep when it was cold and dark and be alert when it was bright during the day. And there are also other things in our environment that can trigger us to be vigilant and awake or sleepy. So we're going to talk about how we do that. Another quick thing, we'll talk about optimizing daytime light, and then also for our circadian rhythm for parents, our circadian rhythm, circa dia, about a day, usually about 24 hours. Except for teenagers, it gets longer, usually around 25 to 26 hours, which is why for teenagers, they want to sleep later. It is not just them being difficult, their circadian rhythm is actually modified. As we get older into as people age, then our circadian rhythm shortens, which is why you see people who are older wake up earlier in the morning, because their circadian rhythm is actually less than 24 hours. So just a quick note for parents, anybody struggling with their teenager who doesn't want to get out of bed. For them, it's not so much necessarily going to bed earlier, it's finding an extra half hour in the morning with your teen, if you can let them sleep in just a little bit longer. How to create more routines in the morning so they have less to do in the morning. Maybe it's no screen time, maybe the lunches are packed and they showered in the evening so they can get that extra half hour to really help them from a sleep standpoint. So, sleep. Number one biggest impact on your circadian rhythm is light. And why does circadian rhythm work? We're still learning about what it does, but we know the circadian rhythm, yes, of course, it controls our melatonin and how well we sleep, but it also controls a host of other hormone cycles and body cycles. In fact, one study out of Harvard, they took 10 students and they just totally messed up their circadian rhythm. They had them waking up at 10 p.m. and then 2 a.m. and all hours of the day. And in 7 days, they had gained weight, their blood pressure rose, all their inflammatory markers were higher, and a third of them would have tested positive for prediabetes, just by messing with your circadian rhythm. So again, in today's world, we have Netflix, we have bright lights, we have our smartphones, we have work to do. All of that really messes up our circadian rhythm, makes it difficult for sleep and for general health. So, number one thing for design for sleep is during the day, optimize your light. The moment I wake up, since doing this research, I go either, if it's light out outside, look out the window, get some bright light outside. If that doesn't exist, I have bright lights in my bathroom that will wake the dead. And then also in a pinch, grab your smartphone. It's not a great way to wake up, but that blue light stops your melatonin production, resets your circadian rhythm for the day, which doesn't just help you wake up at that moment, but by resetting your circadian rhythm, it means it's going to be easier for you to fall asleep earlier that night. For every additional hour you get of bright light during the day, you can shift your circadian rhythm by about a half hour within reason. So again, we don't get a lot of light outside today because a lot of us go in, we work in the offices and we're inside and then we go home and it's dark. Get some time outside. Important for you and important for your kids. I skipped. Okay, hold on. That was the sun. Now the light bulbs. So on the flip side, you want to minimize your light at night within 1 to 2 hours before bed. This is especially important for kids and young children. Preschoolers are even more sensitive to light. There was a study in preschoolers, and God bless people who research preschoolers who did this study, but they had a light box. And they had, for an hour or two before bed, they had these bright, bright lights with the kids, and then they measured their melatonin. And after having that for an hour, their melatonin levels were 90% lower than they should have been to go to sleep. And they stayed low for the next hour. So for an hour or two before everybody should be going to bed, try to dim the lights. Michael Bruce, who's a sleep expert, I've quoted in the book, says that in any room you should have no more than 300 watts, or a light should be all under 30 to 40 watts. So I have a couple of bedside lamps, and that's what we turn on at night. We try not to turn on the bright overhead lights because I want my 18-month-old to go to sleep. And then I want myself to go to sleep. So again, minimize that, and along those lines, minimize your devices. The blue light from the devices, I imagine many of you have heard this before, it is exquisite for stopping that melatonin production. Within 1 to 2 hours before sleep, you do not want to do this because you cannot be looking at your phone and then expect to be falling asleep because melatonin needs to be released about an hour and a half before sleep. So again, 1 to 2 hours before bed, either put away the device. If you really have to have it, get some blue blocker glasses. They're really, really awesome looking. No, they're not. But you can buy them on Amazon for about 20 bucks. And they will block that blue light. It's not as effective as not using the device, but we have to use our phones and our computers at times. Lastly, for design, is sleep. For design for sleep, is temperature. 63 to 68. That's what the temperature should be in your room. That is what is conducive because at night your body temperature starts to fall with sleep. So the cooler your room is, the more your body temperature will fall, help you sleep. And if this helped you win the thermostat wars, you're welcome. All right, moving from design to automate. So our body and our brain loves habits because it's another way for it to get to be lazy because it batches two things together. That way you're not thinking about them. And this is a great way to make healthy changes permanent. So we do this everywhere. You get in your car, you put on your seatbelt. You get home, you take off your shoes. Those are habits that our brains do. How can we make it possible around healthy decisions? Because studies have shown that people who do make healthy changes didn't have any greater willpower than the rest of us. They actually just had systems so that they didn't have to use willpower at all. So how do you make a habit? You have the cue here, reward, routine, and reward. And at the end, I'm going to hand out little Post-its. I want everybody to write down the one hack they want to do. That's going to be kind of a cue for many people. You can put it on if you want your thing to be a gratitude at night, then put it on your mirror by where you brush your teeth so you'll see that. Because no matter how great this is, mindset change without behavioral change doesn't land you anywhere. You got to have that cue in there. So your cue is the one thing that you do every day, regardless. Some of you doesn't take your input, like you have to get up, or you have to drop your kids off at school, or you have to show up to the office. Things that you kind of have to do. That's your cue. Then you pick your routine, and the routine is what you want to do. So your routine, maybe it's walking for 5 minutes. Maybe it's doing 3 gratitudes at night, which I'll be getting into. Whatever it is, choose that and make it small. The routine and what we're learning about the science of brain habits is that the routine does not have to be big. Your routine does not need to be run a 5K. In fact, I'd rather you not. If that's your goal, say you want to do 6 a.m., I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. and run. The way I did it, because I had to move my clock earlier and wake up earlier, you start tiny changes. I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. and I'm going to go run a half mile. And it's not some brain game like you read in some magazines, like run a half mile, you'll end up running 3. No, I want you just to go run a half mile. I don't want you to run any more than that. Because why? Think of how water goes through granite. It takes a long time, but what is important is that the water always follows that same track. It doesn't matter if it's just one drip or a little stream. It follows that same track, and that is how you create neural pathways and behavioral change. So make it tiny. If you want to learn more on that, BJ Fogg is a Stanford behavioral expert. He talks about tiny habits. To get himself into a push-up, he wanted to get more buff, so he said, after I brush my teeth, I'll do 2 push-ups every day. That was it. Tiny habits. Keep it small, and then put a little reward in. Until you have the habit in place, it's okay to have little rewards. Maybe you buy yourself a new water bottle or some socks or a new set of headphones, something like that. Not a cookie. That defeats purpose. But give yourself a little reward. Help you do it. Some quick ways, habits. Again, habits can be small. I have a colleague who said, I didn't go for a run this morning because I didn't have a half hour. There is no exercise police that says you only get credit if you only do a half hour. In fact, studies have shown that when women aimed for just 10 minutes of exercise in as many intervals as they wanted a day, they got more total exercise in a week than those who only did a 30-minute exercise of aerobics. So again, small, tiny changes. And again, you see a little push-ups, running, whatever it is, keep it small, aim for small habits, particularly with exercise, until you get that routine in place. Stress is another one. It's another great habit. This gentleman looks very zen, doesn't he? We're going to do a little breathing thing, exercise, and I'm going to have everybody do it right now. This is another habit that you can do. Maybe some people do this the moment they wake up. Some people do it the moment they get to work. Some people do it when they're on the phone with Comcast. Whatever your trigger is, sometimes I need to use it for all three. But it's a really quick thing, and hopefully you can just have it be something that comes up when you are feeling stressed or anxious. That's the cue to do this. So everybody just put your feet comfortably on the ground. You can close your eyes, you can leave them open, doesn't really matter. This only takes 12 seconds. Nobody's gonna come up and tickle you or anything else. You're gonna just, in the summary, you're gonna breathe in, hold it, let it out, hold it, okay? So everybody breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold it, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold it, 2, 3, 4. That's it. Anybody feel better? A little bit more relaxed? Maybe you felt some tension that you didn't realize you're even holding. Really easy habit. People who do that tend to be more present in the next interaction. They tend to remember the next interaction, and your cortisol levels fall. Similarly, for stress is having that morning routine, having something that you do every morning to give you a sense of control. Because if you wake up to the sound of your alarm sounding like an alarm, an air raid, that's not a great way to set the tone for your day. So maybe you just sit there for a couple minutes and do some reading. Maybe you just do a singular gratitude. Write down what you're grateful for that day. Maybe you interact with your child for just 2 to 3 minutes, something small to set the tone for your day. And then lastly is stopping multitasking. We have to talk about this because we think we're really good multitaskers. We are not. We're really bad. In fact, our brain can't multitask. It just bounces back and forth. Each time it does, it burns more glucose, it doubles our rate of error, worsening our memory and worsening our productivity. So instead of multitasking, single task. Stop, put down whatever you're doing, stop trying to talk to your spouse, buy something on Amazon and fix dinner, because we know what happens. You end up with 12 of the same shampoo, you guys. It doesn't work. Instead, do those things individually. It seems like it takes more time, but actually when you single task, block out time. Say, this is what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna turn off my device. I'm gonna turn off email and those little pings, because anybody been working on something and then Nordstrom sale, and then you're like, ooh. And you're like, wait, I don't even have like a dog. Why am I at the Nordstrom's dog sale part? But it distracts you. So turn that off. Single task, focus on what you are doing. I'm gonna skip the sleep. I wanna talk really quickly on sugar addiction because we talk about sugar. Sugar triggers the exact same part of the brain as drugs do. And the problem is that hidden sugars are in 74% of our foods in the grocery store. So your brain starts to think, wow, I'm eating a steak with barbecue sauce. Everything is sweet. I must always expect sweet. So just a couple of really quick quizzes for everybody. I just need to have the dun, 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 dun music. Which has more sugar? Just throw it out there, come on. Okay, so I don't know if you can see, this is small. Okay, so you can see here's your Yoplait yogurt, sugar's 26 grams. I feel like Vanna. Your Twinkie has 17 grams. That is not to say you can have a Twinkie for breakfast, but to highlight the amount of sugar. Okay, now I know we're in Atlanta. This is dangerous to show this slide, but which has more sugar? This is not anything against either brand. Yeah. So the naked sugar is, total sugar is 61 grams. Mind you, this was no added sugars, 61 grams, and total sugars in the Coca-Cola, 39 grams. Again, this is not anything about naked brands. There's nothing they're doing wrong. It just shows that when you have juice, it distills down the sugars, period. So again, this is not a comment on brands. This is a comment on the fact of juice. Lastly, you guys know the answers by now, right? Sugar's 10 grams, sugar's 11 grams. Again, do not put chocolate syrup on your salad tonight. I did not say you could do that. But again, hidden sugars in everything. So how do you do it? How do you look for it? Because the FDA keeps changing labeling. You can't look for added sugar because that's not consistently on anything. But what I want you to do, look in the top 5 of the ingredient list. They list by the highest amount by volume. If any of those top 5 have sugar by any name, anything ending in ose, molasses, honey, agave, corn syrup, there's 60 plus different names for sugar. That means it's going to be high in sugar. You don't even have to look at the grams. I don't care what the grams say. If these things are in the first 5, it's a dessert, it's not a food. I'm gonna move on to the R, because we're short on time, is reframe. Now, reframing your thoughts and intentions. We've spent the first 2 things, D and the A, talking about how to free up brain capacity, because this is where we need to be focusing. This is what tends to fall to the wayside because we're so busy focusing on the two things that don't need it. We're going to switch that. Free up your brain capacity so you can switch here, because this is what matters, and this is where we can make big changes. Now remember, the gorilla image showed that we subconsciously filter. And with that filtering, we affect what we see. Don't believe me? Was it a blue or black dress or a white or gold dress? Anyone who thinks it's white or gold, I think you're crazy. But that's not this talk. What do you hear here?
Laurel. Laurel.
Who hears Yanni?
Laurel.
Who hears Laurel? Yep. So again, which gets to the Buddha. I like quoting the Buddha because it makes me feel far more zen than I have any right to deserve to be. But with our thoughts, we make our world. And with most of us, that often from our brain standpoint is from that fast brain gives us that negativity bias. Because that's what we needed for survival, was to run first and to assume the threat. But that doesn't work in today's world when we're constantly getting stressors of an email or traffic or anything else, saying that negativity bias is counterproductive. So number one is see the forest for the trees. Again, we are wired to be looking for threats. I went on a hike with my kids and it's fall, so there's spiders out. And what was I doing on this hike? I was looking for poison ivy, I was looking for thorns, and I had a stick and I was whacking in case a spider was ahead of me because I didn't want to walk into a spider web. And we were 3/4 of the way through and I thought, I haven't enjoyed this hike at all. I haven't looked around. How often do we do that? When people say, enjoy this time, and when somebody tells me to enjoy this time, I want to say, like, here's my child at 2 a.m, would you like them? But I really think that what they're talking about is seeing the forest for the trees, not just seeing the threats and the dirty diapers and the homework and the college admission essays, but the forest and the beauty around us too, and being able to see that. I'm gonna go quickly through because I want to be cognizant of time. Finish this. Number 2, reframe. Listen to your slow brain. Remember, there's your Chris Farley brain. It's ready, fire, aim. Wait, not so helpful, but that is what happens. And so it's important to first start to recognize the sign when your fast brain, that automatic thoughts, when they're kicking in. Typically, those are from cognitive behavioral therapy and tells us that if you start a thought with always or never, if that starts to be, if you notice that, then you're probably into one of your automatic negative patterns. So those inner monologues we all get, we all have those patterns, right? And we start to swirl, and then you get upset or angry and angry and angry and angry, and then it's gone. So first is start to hear that. You're like, that's fast brain speaking. That's fast, automatic, negative thought brain speaking. They always get this wrong, or this never happens the way I want it to. Step number 2 is to say, is that really true? Can you find data that supports that? It can be tough to start to intervene with that fast brain because that fast brain is used to going in and overriding any slow brain, any reason. But you can intentionally do that. By doing that breathing exercise kind of gives you a little bit of space. We're talking about a couple other things today to give you space. But just saying, is that really true? Just acknowledging it at first and labeling, that's fast brain. Sometimes you can't get any further than that, and that's okay. But if you just start saying, I'm going to start identifying that, that's the first step. Number 3 is to assume positive intent. So the former PepsiCo CEO Indra Nooyi talked about this. Say you're driving down the highway, 285. There's nothing that's worse for Zen than driving around 285, right? So you're driving and this car comes over and they swerve into your lane. You swerve into the shoulder to avoid hitting them. And then what do? They swerve the other way. They cut off 2 other cars and they exit. I mean, just by telling that story, how many of you kind of were clenched up a little bit, your fists a little bit? You're mad. You're probably going to be mad for the next hour. You're going to go into work still groaning out. The person's probably texting and watching Facebook and doing the Twitter at the same time. Now, what if I told you that instead that person was a mom and her child was choking in the back and she was trying to get to an exit to save her child? That's what assume positive intent does, because you'll probably never know what happened in that car. You may never know what the intended tone of that tone-deaf email was, or somebody's comment. It doesn't really matter though. Because if you assume negative intent, it changes you and how you feel. And if you assume positive intent, it changes you. And if you can interact again with that person, if you have assumed the positive intent and try to see the context possibly, you're going to change your interactions with them. Just the little things, assuming positive intent. Reframing again, reframing gratitude. So research by Martin Seligman out of Harvard. They looked at undergraduates and they ranked them by happiness. They looked at the top 10% of happiness and the bottom 10% of happiness students, and they found that there was no significant tie between their life events at all. Their life events did not predict their happiness and positivity. In fact, for most of us, you could say that we have a happiness set point that we come back to. And it's based on our environment, growing up, our genetics, and a lot of times the old school of thought is that we can't really change that happiness set point. Seligman in his research has shown that that's actually not the case. One key tool, and that's gratitude. So as Rick Hansen said, the brain is like a Velcro for negative experiences, but Teflon for positive ones. And it's true, because those negative experiences create more of an emotional attachment, and we attach itself to that, and that creates more of a memory. So how can you flip that? So again, this R section, we're talking about intentionally using your thought processes to change some of our innate brain patterns. So gratitude, so either in the morning you can do one, or at night, make a habit of at night writing down 3 new things, it has to be new, 3 new things for which you're grateful that day. A great thing is to do this with your kids. Children who are raised thinking more about gratitude tend to have greater sense of compassion, positivity, and performance in school. As Sean Aker says, we think that I have to wait for success to be happy, but the flip is true, that people who are happier and have greater positivity have greater success. So again, this is one of my favorites. Do this at night. Maybe you write this on your Post-it, and then write at night, have a little journal, or do it on your phone, but that kind of defeats my whole blue light purpose, so I try not to have people do that. But you know what? You can't get everything right, so that's okay. Write it down. Write down your 3. Remember, because what happens then, your brain, instead of scanning for people who are out to get you, during the day, after a week or so, you start to scan for good things, because you're looking for things you can write down that night. In fact, Sean Aker's studies show that they can take people after 21 days from a level of being a low-grade pessimist, they can actually become a low-grade optimist. You can change your brain. Lastly is engage, because nobody makes changes alone. Nobody quits. When somebody's trying to quit smoking, we engage their social network. No mom is an island. No parent, no person is an island. So engage that network. Find your tribe, talk to them, have them support you. Maybe you both work on the same Post-it and keep each other honest. Because having that buddy and knowing that you have that accountability not only makes you more likely to do it, it helps you troubleshoot and makes you feel encouraged when those times when you may miss the bar, because that happens. Archimedes said, "Give me a place to stand and a lever long enough, and I will move the world." Because what we're talking about today are these little tiny habits and really what's called a transfer effect. Because they're like little enzymes. And any of you who have kids are in chemistry and PChem right now, it's these little tiny habits are enzymes that can accelerate the reaction a trillionfold. Because what we find is if you make one change in an area that you feel in control and interested in, you're more likely to make changes in other areas that you didn't even intend. People who start a small exercise habit are more likely to eat more fruits and vegetables and eat less saturated fat without intending to. People who do a 2-minute positivity exercise are more likely to quit smoking without intending to. It's these incremental changes that make the big long-term ones, and because your behaviors matter. So I'll finish with one more story. A few months after that other story I talked to you about, I was working in the ER again, and the phone rang on the little physician phone, and it was security. And it's never good to get a call from security when you're in the ER, never good. This time a patient I had been admitting to rule out a heart attack had been on her way up to the floor when the elevator broke down. She was now stuck between the 3rd and 4th floors with her nurse having chest pain. So I grabbed my medications, grabbed my stethoscope, remembered my ABCs. They had me go up to the 4th floor because it was stuck between the 3rd and 4th floor, and the 4th floor doors open. You could see the top half of the elevator. I could see their heads. And somehow I ended up being required to shimmy in, which was what, as I was doing it, I was thinking, I hope this is my only Mission Impossible moment ever, because I don't like doing my own stunts. We did. We took care of her. We gave her medications, had her feeling better before the elevator was working again, because I used that system. Because we had a system. Because you cannot handle what life throws at you, but you can handle whether you catch it or get pummeled down. You just have to start, because your best is still ahead of you. So I ask each of you today, we'll pass out the Post-its. I want you again to choose that one thing that you're going to do. choose it, write it down, keep it small. I want you to have it, and I want it to be something you can succeed at. So if it's too big and it's hard to do, make it smaller. Because remember, you know what to do. Now go gown up. Thank you.